So, welcome everyone to today's talk. It's about simple tricks to drop some weight and tone up, but actually with a main focus on how to also to do that while supporting your health and hormones and longevity. Because a lot of you have probably, if you landed up here today, you've probably tried some diets and you're confused with what's right. You maybe tried some fad diets, they didn't work, or they did work, and then you just fell off the wagon because they're too restrictive or not healthy in the long run. So today I will actually be talking about how can we support our hormones and health so that we have a strong metabolism, and then the weight loss and the toning up is just a welcome side effect rather than looking at the other way around. And that way we also, by supporting our hormones and health, we then also live longer and healthier and happier rather than constantly being on that roller coaster of trying to lose weight, and then that might mess with our metabolism and slow it down, and then it might mess with our mood and our sleep, all these other factors. So today we'll talk about how can we actually optimize our hormones so that all of that works better. And also we'll look at what are underlying factors that might be messing with these hormones and our metabolism. So this is, I always like to use this as a starting point, this little graphic with these different shapes, apples and pears and potatoes. A lot of people can relate to that often. We won't dive into, let's say, the specifics today, but we will be talking about what the different body shapes mean from a hormonal perspective and what underlying triggers are. And there's often an overlap. So it's not that one person's just the one type and the other person is only the other. It's often an overlap, but they have specific underlying factors and hormonal imbalances that can contribute to that weight just not wanting to budge. And then we'll talk about what you can do in a day-to-day starting tomorrow to support these. Okay, so a little bit before we get started properly, what is functional medicine? What's the approach that we will be taking today? And functional medicine is a little bit in between normal medicine, a nutritionist, and a naturopath. So instead of, let's say, like a nutritionist or a health coach saying you need to eat some more vegetables or get some more sleep, which a lot of us know, or a naturopath saying let's try some herbs, or the doctor saying let's do these medications, functional medicine actually connects it and says, okay, let's look at blood work, let's look at your gut health, let's look at what are your nutrients, and then connect it with the newest research and the newest science and say, okay, what can we make specifically for you? What are the underlying factors that are really science-backed, that are not just some kind of something that someone has said somewhere on the internet, but actually science-based, but is very specific to your biology. And it also helps, it's related to your diet and your lifestyle, so you can make changes in your day-to-day rather than taking some drugs that might have long-term side effects. Okay, it also, you might be thinking, how does this all matter? It's all, maybe you think, okay, my mother has issues with her thyroid and I've been having issues with my weight all my life, so maybe there's nothing I can do about it. But there's actually this wonderful and very fascinating field of epigenetics, which is around our genes, where our diet and lifestyle actually decides which genes we turn on or off, as you can see here. So we can actually, by the way we live, we can in a way decide whether our body turns on good genes or it turns on the bad ones, and and with our diet and lifestyle and toxins and pollution and other factors like that, we can influence whether our body turns on a gene that is linked to healthy aging, hormone health, weight loss, or whether it turns on the bad ones. And we all have some good and bad ones. Okay, and then the next step, and we'll talk about that very briefly in the end, there's the way I practice is precision health. So I usually like to do some lab testing and then add science-backed tools, like I said, so you can make very specific changes. And I'll just mention at the end what's out there, but today is really all about what can you do even without any testing, some things where you can just go and try without more specifics. Okay, a little bit about myself. I'm Mirthe. I'm a functional medicine practitioner. I have an undergraduate in health, and then I did a postgraduate in functional medicine. I came to that field through my own health journey of Crohn's disease, which is an autoimmune disease where your immune system attacks your gut, and then it's pretty messy and not very fun. But because I had that undergraduate in health and learned how to read research, I found all these papers, and that was 15 years ago, and tried these things where my normal doctor said there's nothing I can do about it. I tried these things that I found in research, and they actually put my autoimmune disease into remission. And so then I went on this search of finding more about it, and eventually found this field of functional medicine, which is actually quite large in the US already, but it's slowly coming over to the UK and Europe as well, and then became a functional medicine practitioner. And so now I see patients, help them take charge of their health, but also still dedicate a whole big part of my time in research, because there's so much wonderful new research coming out every day. Little medical disclaimer before we get started is that all of the information today is not there to diagnose anything. So if you have any symptoms, please do go to your GP and get them checked out, and then come in, and then you can try these things. So if you have symptoms, anything that doesn't feel right, go get them cleared up, that there's not something that we're missing, and then you can adjust these specific things that we're talking about today as an adjunct to what your normal medical doctor would have said. Okay, so the first part of today's session, so we'll be talking about the underlying triggers of why these hormones might not be working, because as if you're like a lot of my patients, you probably have tried a lot of things and you think, why is this not working for me and for my neighbor, my best friend, whoever it is working? So we'll be diving a little bit deeper into the underlying triggers so that you can understand a bit better what might be going on, and then you can make educated choices. So it's not, again, some kind of just some diet that you're falling off soon because it's too complicated or you don't understand why, but that you actually understand why these things are important to do. Okay, so you can become the CEO of your own health once you understand why. Okay, so let's dive into those different shapes, and we'll start with the apple shape. Now, I have a whole online course where I go into a lot of detail into what's all these different shapes, and it's a 4-week course, but today is obviously only an hour, so I'll be just talking about little bits, and I'll dive right in without all the different big explanations. So what I find often with people that come into my practice and then in research confirms it, is that people that have that layer of fat around the waist, that apple shape, where they can't budge even though they might be trying all the right things, it's often linked to insulin and blood sugar issues, inflammation, or cortisol levels. I see this also very often with patients that are quote unquote skinny fat. They have skinny limbs, skinny arms, but then they just have this layer of belly fat that doesn't want to go away. And so they're skinny, but that belly fat is bothering them. And like I said, often that's due to blood sugar, inflammation, or stress levels. And we'll talk about that in a moment a little more, where these are coming from. But what research has shown is that when we are either having insulin problems, blood sugar, or we have inflammation, or we are stressed and have cortisol issues, then our brain actually sends signals to our belly to store fat there instead of storing it around our arms or our legs. So it redistributes the fat from there to the waistline, even though if you're quote unquote skinny. Okay, so today's talk is also a little bit about why this matters in the long run for healthy aging and longevity, well-being. And what research has shown also is that this apple shape is not just maybe a vain concern, but it also has been linked to other issues like PCOS, which is linked to infertility and hormonal acne. It can also be leading to things like perimenopause issues or worsen perimenopause issues. It can contribute to Alzheimer's, to cancers, cardiovascular disease like strokes and heart attacks. So overall, we want to make sure that not just from a vain perspective, wanting to get rid of that belly fat, but actually want to make sure that everything works well inside so that we don't run into these issues down the line. Okay, so where's this insulin for the one that just joined? So we're talking about the apple shape as a starting point, and the apple shape is one of the different body shapes where sometimes people might be skinny, but they have this extra layer of belly fat that just won't budge. And there's 3 reasons for that most commonly. One being insulin resistance, second, inflammation, and third, stress cortisol levels. I always get confused when there are too many people joining in, so here we are. Okay, so where's this insulin resistance coming from? You might have heard of insulin. It's a very important hormone in the body that signals when we're eating something, in particular with sugars or carbs. It opens our cells up so it can actually take that in and use it for energy. Now, if we have a lot of food all the time, if we overeat calories or we overeat sugars, then the body constantly pumps out insulin and eventually the cells stop responding. Even though there's sugar, they say, no, we're not listening to insulin anymore. And when that happens, the brain then starts to accumulate fat around the waistline. So this is something that a lot of people are kind of familiar with. Overeating can often lead to weight gain. But there are other reasons for this insulin resistance. And one of them, wait, let me get to this one. One of them is inflammation. And research shows that inflammation, as just on its own, can redistribute weight to the waistline, but also it makes the body more insulin resistant. So it's kind of a double whammy to contribute to that apple shape, that belly fat around the waistline that is resistant to weight loss often, even if you're trying all these things. And where's this inflammation coming from? And again, I see this quite commonly in my patients. It's a very common concern people come to me with is, so inflammation, a lot of people have heard of. It's kind of a trendy word that's been thrown around in social media nowadays, but there are usually reasons why this is happening. And inflammation in itself is actually a healthy mechanism that helps us survive. Our immune system, when we have an infection, let's say a virus, bacteria, our immune system pumps out inflammation to get rid of that virus, bacteria. Usually that happens a couple days, maybe a little longer if the infection is a little stronger, and then that inflammation kills it off and stops again. However, if that inflammation starts to linger and is a chronic low-grade inflammation, then that starts to cause issues in our gut, in our system. It also starts to degrade our overall health. It contributes to things like Alzheimer's and cancers, anxiety, endometriosis, lots of different factors. But it also leads to that belly fat. Now, where is this low-grade chronic lingering inflammation coming from that we don't want because it messes with our weight and our health? And one of the reasons is if there's a chronic infection. So if the infection for some reason hasn't been gotten rid of properly and it lingers, then the immune system constantly pumps out this low-grade inflammation. And we commonly see that in our gut. Now, again, this is something that people are more aware of these days. You might have heard about the gut microbiome. In our gut here, we have a whole bunch of bacteria, but also different types of fungus. And they're needed to break down foods, to metabolize it, to make certain nutrients, to keep our gut lining nice and healthy. But if there's an overgrowth of bad type of bacteria, then our body pumps out inflammation because it tries to fight it off, but for some reason it's not getting rid of it. Also, if we have problems in the gut and we have bad type of bacteria in there, it starts to make our gut more permeable. They call it leaky gut, but it actually is a thing where our gut lining becomes slightly more permeable and allows foods that are normally healthy, like an almond or an egg, pass into our bloodstream. And then also in the immune system, because it's a different size of if the gut is more permeable, it allows different shapes of that same almond or egg into the bloodstream. And then the immune system says, wait, I don't recognize this. What is this? This must be an invader. Let me pump out inflammation. And then you develop food intolerances, where every time you eat that healthy food, your body pumps out this inflammatory reaction to try and kill it off. But it's obviously not something to kill off. And then you're constantly chronically inflamed and you do whatever you want to do, but the weight won't budge. And you also often have brain fog or joint aches or all these other issues related to inflammation. So those are very common things I see in my patient population. But like I said, research backs it up. Another one, so often bacterial overgrowth in the gut, but also fungal overgrowth. One that people often have heard of is candida, which is a type of fungus. SIBO is an overgrowth of bacteria in the small intestine, where we normally should have most of our bacteria in the different part of the intestine. And SIFO, a lot of people, I just throw these words in because a lot of people might have heard of them, and now I'm trying to make sense of them for you. SIFO is when we have a fungal overgrowth in our small intestine. Again, messing with our digestive system, causing inflammation because the immune system is constantly pumping things out to try and get rid of that. And also, lastly, with that inflammation is that if we're not having the right nutrients to quench inflammation, get rid of it, then our body's also more of in an inflammatory state and contributes to that weight around the waist. And one of the most famous ones, but it is one of the most important ones, is actually omega-3. We need omega-3s get rid of inflammation is called resolution in science, and it helps the body, if there is inflammation, to calm it down. Another reason for that belly fat that I mentioned is cortisol stress. So number one are these blood sugar swings leading to insulin resistance. Number two is inflammation. And number three is cortisol. Now, cortisol, a lot of people, again, have probably heard of it. It's our stress hormone, or one of the stress hormones. And it's actually not all bad. As you can see here, this is 6 a.m. and this is 6 p.m. So this part here is daytime. The blue curve is cortisol and the red curve is melatonin. Now, in a healthy person, the way we evolved and the way it should be, we have a nice spike of cortisol first thing in the morning, and then it should taper off throughout the day so that we can have a nice sleep at night. Melatonin comes up. They kind of balance each other out. If one is high, the other one can't come up in a way. So the problem arises if we are constantly overworked or there's other stressors. If this pattern becomes all messed up, rather than having a nice spike in the morning and then taper off, either we wake up and we have this anticipatory stress and then it's low for the rest of the day, or it's low in the morning when it should be high because our body's actually just dragging itself out of bed, and then we're slowly revving ourselves up, and then all the daytime stresses come in. We may be having tons of coffee, other caffeinated foods, drinks, and then we stay too high for too long, and even in the evening, and that messes with our metabolism and our cortisol and circadian rhythm. Now, as that relates to our weight, research shows that if we either have too high cortisol levels first thing in the morning, oh, again, someone's 1 second, sorry, mute. All the people that join late, I can't mute them properly. Apologies for that. So research shows that if we wake up in the morning and we have this anticipatory stress for the day, if we have too much cortisol right in the morning, then that can lead to obesity and weight gain issues, even if we eat the same types of food as if we weren't stressed out. And on the other side, research also shows that if cortisol is too low in the morning and or stays too high for the rest of the day, later in the day, that also messes with our weight distribution. So again, when this cortisol is either way too high in the morning or too low in the morning, or it stays too high late in the day when we should be getting more relaxed, that's when the brain sends signals to our way to store fat, even if we're eating the same food. See this quite often. So one thing that I want to touch upon as well is that oftentimes people say, well, I don't really feel that stressed. That's actually not that often, but sometimes people have a fairly stress-free life. But there's actually other factors that can act like a stressor on the body, and our brain doesn't really distinguish between real and perceived stress. So it can even be, it can be something that we quote unquote usually classify as stress, work deadlines, fight with a spouse, kids, those kinds of things, financial burden. But it could also be other stressors such as trauma, PTSD, that keeps triggering your stress response. It could be chronic infections in the body, like I mentioned before, with these lingering issues in the gut, candida overgrowth, bacterial overgrowth, food intolerances. They act like a tiger where the body has to run away and be stressed out. Heavy metals, pollution, mold exposure, not enough nutrients, or lack of sleep, they all mimic a tiger that the body has to run off. And then we get into that fight or flight state all the time, and that messes with our metabolism, stores the weight instead of using it. Okay, that was the apple shape. And I could talk about this topic forever, but we're very time limited today. I'm probably going over a little bit anyways. If you have to jump off at 7, please just go to the recording. So the second one that is common is the pear shape. Now, this often has to do with estrogen, progesterone. I more commonly see this in women that have a cycle still, so a monthly period. The apple shape is more common with women that either on the pill and they don't have a cycle because they're suppressing it, or postmenopausally. But like I said, oftentimes these shapes can actually overlap, and it's not that clear cut that one person only has one or the other. So you could be saying, actually, this both I'm still having a cycle and I feel like I have a pear shape, but I also have this apple. So it often overlaps. But most commonly, if people have this pear shape, it means that they have a cellulite around the legs, bigger butt, and they find that part difficult to shift. That can often have to do with estrogen progesterone imbalances. And you can see here we have this menstrual cycle, 28 days if for the ones that have a cycle. And normally here you can see progesterone, and estrogen's the yellow line, progesterone is the blue line, and it should have this nice little up and down throughout the cycle. Now, if in that second part of the cycle, we have too little progesterone, so this progesterone line drops and the estrogen line comes up, then this is something called estrogen dominance that I very regularly see in my patients, and that can then lead to that pear shape. There are other hormonal imbalances as well, but that's just the one that is very common, and that is linked to that pear shape. It also has to do with not just the amount of estrogen that's there, but how the body's breaking it down. We won't go into detail here, but sometimes the body has the right amount of estrogen, but it's breaking it down into a toxic version, and that can also contribute to that pear shape and estrogen dominance symptoms. Now, some of the symptoms, other than that weight around the thighs and the butt, and also maybe cellulite, can be painful periods, fibroids in the breasts or in the ovaries, uterus. It could be endometriosis. It could be anxiety. It could be having issues with conceiving, infertility, even all the way to breast cancers, ovarian cancers. They all have a strong estrogen dominance component. And like I said, it's often not only the estrogen, but also the way it's broken down that can be an issue here. Okay, where is this coming from? In a very short nutshell, oftentimes, if the body is stressed, it, like it was before we looked at that tiger. If the body thinks there's a tiger chasing at us, it thinks it's not safe to make babies. And even if that's not what you want to do, our body's kind of hardwired to do that. So then it actually stops the body from ovulating properly, and then we don't make enough progesterone. So that could be one of the reasons, not enough progesterone to balance out the estrogen. It could also be that we're exposing ourselves to a lot of hormone mimicking substances. They're called endocrine disruptors. Things like drinking out of a plastic coffee takeaway mug every day, or drinking out of plastic bottles, or putting a lot of creams on that are synthetic, and have a lot of the synthetic creams have endocrine disruptors in them. They mimic estrogen, but then the body isn't actually able to break them down properly into the good and protective form, but turns it into that toxic form. Also, excess alcohol can contribute to too much estrogen. Okay. The third shape that we're talking about today, very briefly, is the potato shape. Some of you might relate to that. That's when it's, rather than being around the waist and you have kind of skinny arms and legs, or it's mostly around your thighs and butt, it feels like it's just all over, and you're just feeling heavy and chunky and maybe just kind of overall sluggish. And that's usually, and again, all of this is just a usual oversimplification for today's talk, that's often linked to something called subclinical hypothyroidism. So people have probably heard about thyroid issues. Oftentimes people have gone to their doctors, and the doctors have tested their thyroid hormones and said they're fine. So I'm not talking about that, because then that's, if the thyroid has a problem where your doctor says this is an issue, let's give you thyroid medication, then you're being dealt with. But oftentimes people say, I've gone to the doctor and they said my thyroid is fine, but I Googled all the symptoms with hypothyroidism, low thyroid, and I feel like I have them. So there's something called subclinical hypothyroidism, where you're actually in the normal range, but in the low range, in a low third of it. So your body is just not getting quite enough thyroid hormones to optimally function. And the thyroid is really important for overall metabolism. It helps us speed up the metabolism. It helps us make energy. It helps us burn fuel and calories. So if we have this subclinical hypothyroidism, it can also make us cold, lose hair, slows the metabolism, slows our digestion, so can lead to constipation. slows our mental agility, depression, can contribute to high cholesterol, fertility issues, but then it also can mess with our insulin signaling. So it can then also mess with that or contribute to that apple shape. So that's, in a way, the body's all overlinked all the time. Let me just, someone's put something into the chat. Okay, there we go. The joy of me doing this together alone today. I have to constantly go and go into the chat, see what people are saying so I don't miss someone saying I can't hear you. Okay, so some of the most common reasons, underlying factors, and this again is very oversimplified, for subclinical hypothyroidism can be purely deficiencies in building blocks. I see this all the time. People come in and they just don't actually eat the right foods so to make thyroid. Our thyroid hormones are made from protein and iodine, and a lot of people don't eat enough of both of them. And then to turn the precursor hormone into the active form, we need a lot of different minerals, lots of them, iron and zinc and lots of other wonderful nutrients. And oftentimes they're deficient in those two or on the low end of the ranges. And then they just simply, the body can't make it. It can also be that there's something called Hashimoto's, where there's autoimmune markers that our immune system attacks our thyroid and actually makes it harder for the thyroid to do its job. And there can be underlying triggers for that. And in functional medicine, we look at what are the triggers for any kind of autoimmune issues, for immune system dysregulation. And what I see often, and what again research confirms, are food intolerances are quite common. That if we constantly eat something that the body doesn't like or thinks for some reason it's decided that it is an invader. And a very common one is gluten for the thyroid, but it can be healthy foods like almonds and eggs, like I mentioned before, or even ginger. If you eat that, the immune system constantly pumps out inflammation, and eventually, if that happens all the time, it might start to overreact against itself, and that is kind of, in a very, again, simplified version, what an autoimmune disease is. Can also be from chronic infections that is constantly irritating the immune system, lingering viral issues. I see this quite commonly now since COVID. People post-COVID, post-vaccine or the actual virus, they might have long COVID and there's a lingering viral issue, often a reactivation of other viruses like Epstein-Barr or cytomegalovirus, from glandular fever and things like that were there before and were no issue, and all of a sudden they are triggered from this new infection that hit them, and then the immune system constantly tries and fight it, and then can cause issues with the thyroid. Also, inflammation and blood sugar swings can actually mess with our thyroid. So again, it all is linked back to each other. There's also a few other, I would call them miscellaneous factors that I quite commonly see for people that try, quote unquote, all the right things with their diet, but they just have issues losing weight. And another very common one I see in my female patients is iron, being low in iron and Bs. So iron is actually needed to make red blood cells and transport oxygen to most of our cells, or everywhere in the body really. And if we don't have enough oxygen and iron in the body, then the metabolism slows down. It slows down the thyroid, but it has a lot more wide-reaching effects. It just slows everything down and nothing works as well. It also messes with our satiety, and we get more hungry. It messes with our sleep. So there are lots of kind of knock-on effects how this is affecting our weight. And I often see that being low in the ones that still have a period in particular, or vegan, vegetarian ones. Or I talked about before how an overgrowth of bacteria and fungus can cause inflammation, but also not enough good bacteria. And there's a lot of research out, in particular the last few years, that shows that there's certain types called Akkermansia. This is one that has got a lot of media recently. Because Akkermansia is a healthy gut bacteria that if we eat a varied, healthy diet with fiber and vegetables, our gut usually can make it. And it helps keep the blood sugar more balanced and keeps us more satiated, makes us feel full quicker. It's become a little bit, I guess the people have become a bit more aware of it because of Wegovy and Ozempic, those weight loss drugs, because they both work on a similar mechanism. Obviously, the drugs are a little bit stronger than the Akkermansia bacteria in our gut, but they both work on something called GLP-1, where the drugs they mimic that. They kind of do what maybe this should be doing in our body, where Akkermansia, the bacteria, can help the body excrete it itself to keep us more balanced, satiated, and not be hungry all the time, and keep our blood sugar more balanced, and make our cells more responsive to insulin so that they don't have to store it as fat, but actually utilize it as energy. Yeah. Okay. So what does that all have to do with aging? Just briefly, I've briefly put it into the different sections, but if we have issues with the apple shape, then it also, the insulin issues, inflammation, they can cause issues down the line towards Alzheimer's disease, cancer risk, Parkinson's disease, strokes, heart attacks, all these types of things. The pear shape, when there's estrogen dominance issues or the estrogens being broken down into the wrong type, that can contribute to issues like breast cancers or endometriosis. So it kind of makes us degrade inside and have a reduced quality of life. Thyroid issues I mentioned can contribute to things like high cholesterol levels, which obviously has a knock-on effect on everything. So we don't just want to deal with this because it's a vain concern, but we actually want to deal with this so we can be in charge of our health and stay healthy and stay thriving in the long run. Okay, so this was the first part where I was talking a little bit about the underlying factors, and now I'll be talking about things that you can do starting tonight, tomorrow, simple steps to try and fix those things. Okay, so the basics of a diet. So obviously part of this blood sugar balance, inflammation, food intolerances has to do with the diet. So I'll be talking about that first. Okay, so cornerstone number one would be carb cycling. And I'll just touch upon the most basic ones today. We won't have time to go into all the different detail, but we'll go into the most basic ones and you can already start implementing them. So number one, I talked about this blood sugar issue. If we're constantly having blood sugar spikes and drops, it eventually makes our cells more insulin resistant. And then we start to have issues with Alzheimer's and cancers, but also short term, it basically signals to our brain to store fat around the waistline. Okay, so goal is to avoid that. So instead of that red line here, up and down, we want to have the green line where the blood sugar stays nice and steady. Because if we have this up and down, it pumps out insulin, which makes us store fat. And if we have it really nice and steady, our body can pump out something else called glucagon more, which helps us get slimmer. So we want to have a balanced, steady blood sugar with sometimes maybe intermittent ketosis, and we'll get to that in a moment. Okay, so what does that look like? Roughly 6 days per week, you want to have roughly 2 portions of carbs per day, which is a lot less than a lot of people have. I don't want you to go no carb, but low carb. Meaning, what is a portion? It's about a cup size of a hand. So an apple or a cup, like a potato that fits in there, or quinoa, or if you like dark chocolate, you can put that in there. Something, a cup shape, twice a day. And you want to make sure that you're not having that on its own, but that you're having that as a dessert or at the end of a meal. We'll talk about protein and veg and what should be in the meal in a moment. And then 1 day a week, you can have a carb loading day so that your metabolism stays nice and high and you're not. Basically, we want to be low carb most of the time so that the body can tap into its own fat stores and lower that insulin and not constantly have these insulin spikes. But then once in a while, roughly once a week, we do want to kind of reverse that and give the body the signal that there's plenty of food around us and we can eat carbs, and then it spikes certain things like leptin, and it helps with our thyroid, our metabolism to stay elevated and not slowly start to get less and less. Cornerstone number two is no snacking. And you should aim for 2 or 3 meals per day rather than little snacks all the time. I see this often especially in my female patients. They'll have lots of little meals all the time and they feel like they're constantly hangry and they need that extra. They can't go without that extra little bag in their handbag. And The goal is if we manage to support our metabolism enough that you don't need the snacks. And if you're constantly snacking, let's go back to that image here before. If you're constantly snacking, you're constantly getting little insulin spikes, and then you never turn into fat burning mode. You're just constantly in food burning mode. Whether you go for 2 or 3 meals a day, it doesn't really matter from a scientific perspective. It really depends on portion size. If you're a person that finds it really easy to have portion control, then you can have breakfast, lunch, and dinner, 3 meals. If you are someone that finds that really difficult to have smaller 3 meals and constantly feels deprived, there are a lot of people like that, then you might do better with having 2 proper meals a day. And that can be anywhere around a late breakfast and an early dinner, or it could be a breakfast and a dinner, or it could be a lunch and a dinner. So whatever works best for you. Research, that's where the slide was meant to come in. Research shows that it's good to have a period of fasting in the day when we don't add food, so that the body can actually turn into its fat stores and clean up as well. So research shows that if we're fasting, our body A can clean up everything in the gut, B it doesn't burn the food that you're eating, but it can actually tap into its own fat stores. But it also has been shown to reset the gut microbiome, the bacteria and the fungus inside the gut. And if we're constantly putting food in there, it can never really do that, because it's constantly dealing with digestion rather than cleaning up and healing. Now, there's different ways of doing this fasting. It can be skipping breakfast, it can be skipping dinner, like I just said. Research isn't quite conclusive whether you need to have breakfast or whether what time of the morning you should start eating. What it is conclusive about, though, is that you should not wait all day and not eat all day and then have a really big dinner. So they did research and showed that if people have the same amount of calories and quality of food, so the same kind of vegetables and protein, if they eat that in the first part of the day or in 3 meals over the day versus having it all past 4 p.m. and then gorging ourselves in the evening, has a completely different effect on our metabolism and our health, inflammation, cholesterol, those kinds of things. And late eating is not a good idea. So research isn't sure if you have to. Likely it's fine if you wait until 10 a.m. or whatever works with your schedule, but you don't want to wait all day and then have a really late meal. And if you have a late meal, even if you ate earlier already, research shows that will mess with your sleep. And if you don't sleep well, then your body will be more insulin resistant the next day. So the same kind of calories that you're eating if you're eating the same calories the next day as if you had a good night's sleep, you're actually storing more fat around the waistline. Also, your body's more inflamed after a night of bad quality sleep, and that makes you store weight around the waistline, if you remember that from the beginning. And it also makes it, if we haven't had good sleep, it messes with our circadian rhythm, with our cortisol curve. Again, making us store fat. But even more, if we haven't slept well, it's much harder for us to stick to good rules, to use our prefrontal cortex at the front of the brain that can make good decisions, forward-thinking decisions, saying, okay, if I'm eating the salad and the salmon, this is good for me. And if I'm eating if I'm eating fast food and processed food, it's bad for me. If you've had a bad night's sleep, it's much harder to make those good choices, because the body reverts back into survival mode and in the back of the brain, and that starts to send out signals. I want things that make me survive long term, which means lots of calories and lots of sugars and fats combined. So we mess with ourselves here. Another thing I quickly want to touch upon, so if people want to do some more extreme fasting, which I won't have time to get into today, or if people want to do some proper ketosis, the one I said before, the low carb, is not a keto. But if people want to experiment with longer fasts, with proper ketosis, because they read about the health benefits, they are wonderful if done right, then they must be careful with their cycle. So if the woman does it that's still cycling, you only want to do it in the first part of the cycle when you have low hormones, because if you do it around ovulation, extreme fasting, longer fasting, and if you do more extreme ketosis, it can mess with the signals to the brain, and it sends signals to the brain that it's not safe to make babies. And again, this might be not something you're interested in ever or at the moment, but we need that ovulation to make good progesterone in the second part of the cycle, and not too much estrogen. If we have a messed up ovulation because we stressed our body out by not eating enough, or by eating junk food too much, or over exercising, then it won't ovulate properly, and then we will have a problem with our hormones in the second part of the cycle, which can lead to all these other issues that I mentioned before. Okay, we talked about this. Cornerstone number 3, and this is something that I want to talk a little bit more about. Okay, so protein. So I talked about the fact that we want to lower our carbs overall. So you might be thinking, okay, what do I eat then? And research actually shows that most people don't get enough protein. We used to think that we need about 1.6, that we need about 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. I know some of you might not be working with kilograms, but that is a slow amount. Now research shows that we actually need a lot more if we want to live healthy and age well. Now our body is mostly made out of protein and some fats as well. And if we don't get enough protein, then our body becomes frail, our metabolism slows down, we get blood sugar spikes and dips, our muscles start to deteriorate. We need muscles to have a strong metabolism for a good weight and to tone up, but also to stay strong and healthy in the long run and to lower inflammation. So protein is actually really underrated. And for most people, if it's someone that is just a little bit active and does a little bit of exercise here and there, anywhere between 1.5 to 2 grams per kilogram of lean body weight. And you can email me to get a calculation sheet if you are interested in calculating that for you. Then that would be the range you want to go to. If you're really active, then you want to go more towards even higher, 2.2 gram. Now what does that mean? That actually means if it's a person, and it basically means you want to go, for most women, it's around 100 gram of protein per day, or 120 gram of protein. What is that? As an example, a chicken fillet, normal size chicken fillet, 125 gram of chicken, has around 30 grams of protein. Same size turkey has about 35 gram of protein. So if you eat that, then you are at around 65 gram of protein for the day. Most women don't even get that amount when I see them. If you eat, let's say, a tofu, if you're more on the vegetarian, vegan side, tofu, let's say a block of 100 gram, then you're somewhere in the range of 15 to 20 gram of protein. So you can see for most, so I'm quite a small person, I need between 80 and 100 gram of protein, but a lot of women that are a little bit taller, they need a little more. So you actually really you want to calculate how much protein do you need to get to that amount, and that will help stabilize your satiety, speed up your metabolism, speed up your thyroid, and just really actually make you feel full for longer, so you don't feel hungry in between meals, your blood sugar doesn't dip, and it also helps to make neurotransmitters in your brain so that you can make dopamine, serotonin, keeps you happy, motivated, helps you sleep at night, because you haven't had the blood sugar spikes and dips all day that can wake you up at night, but it also helps the body make melatonin at night because it's made from protein. So protein is really important, and there are different types. Again, if you want to email me, I'll send you my email address at the end, or you can reach out to the Life Center and ask about the email address. I can send you this as a sheet. And there's different examples, and in the cheat sheet, if you wanted it, there's also, you can pull it all together and try and calculate a day. And there's obviously different types of protein, but we won't have time to go into details here. Some have a little bit more carbs in it, and you just have to be aware of it. A lot of the beans and legumes, the vegan protein sources other than tofu and soy, are quite high in carbs as well. So you got to be aware of the fact that you do get some protein, but you also get carbs. So it's already your carb and your protein portion. Okay, cornerstone number 4 is to become a qualitarian. And that means you want to get all these different wonderful nutrients that I talked about before. And again, we won't have time to go into all the different details here, but you want enough iodine from seaweed. You want enough minerals to support so iodine for thyroid. You want minerals and nutrients to help break down estrogen into the protective form. You want different nutrients to keep your insulin nice and steady. You also want all these different that colorful vegetables to keep your gut microbiome healthy, because if you're eating, you need a lot of different fiber to support your nice healthy gut microbiome so that you have the good satiety signaling, that you don't have inflammation, you heal your gut lining so that you don't have these food intolerances and inflammatory reactions. So lots of different factors that go into why you should be eating all the rainbow foods like this. Okay, yeah, so what you're eating really determines what's happening in your gut. Processed foods mess with our gut microbiome and have us basically feed the bad type, and then healthy plant-based vegetables, they help to feed the good microbiome that helps lower inflammation and keep us satiated. Okay, so those were the dietary steps, and now a couple more. I know we're ending the talk. We'll get to Q&A in a moment. So cortisol, I talked about stress, how that responds to how that has an effect on the rest of the system, and how that can mess with how the brain distributes the fat around the body. Now, there's obviously different weight loss as stress management techniques, but research shows that if you were to do a certain dietary strategy, weight loss strategy, if you're adding stress management, it actually has been shown to be a lot more beneficial and more effective, and also people stick to those dietary changes more long term. There's different ways of again, we don't have enough time today to go into the details, but obviously different types of stress management. You can do yoga, meditation, breathing exercises. You can do ice bath and saunas, and going into nature, looking at green spaces. There are lots of different ways of shifting over into that, turning on that vagus nerve, that healing mode, and away from that chasing from a tiger fight or flight mode. Okay, exercise. Quick note on that, because I see this quite often again in my patients and clients, is that oftentimes people skimp on sleep to get up in the morning to get their exercise in. And exercise is really important. It helps our cells be more open to insulin, so it helps with that apple shape, and it helps with inflammation, and it helps with getting rid of certain hormones that we don't want in the body, helps balance cortisol. But if we skimp on sleep to get exercise in, then we don't get those benefits. So we're better off getting the sleep so that our body is rested, and then try and get the exercise in at some other time. Also, more is not always better. So exercise, wonderful, important, but doing high intensity exercise every day stresses our body out, rather than if you do it 2 or 3 times a week, a high intensity workout, then you're setting a stress, but then it makes the body stronger, and then you need a rest day where you just do some walking, some gentle movement, whatever that is for you, something you enjoy. You want to move daily, but then do a more intense workout 2 or 3 times a week, and ideally no longer than 45 minutes, because again, once you hit that 45-minute mark of a high intensity workout, you just stress the body out, and then you have all this kind of these bad symptoms and of the cortisol dysregulation, and it actually causes a lot of free radical damage and stress on the body. So more is not better. Sleep, I mentioned, you want to sleep so that you digest your food, but you also have a better food response the next day, less inflammation the next day, better insulin response. Your body is more able to respond to the right food cues, and it's easier for you to stick to healthy food choices. So you want to make sure you sleep well and you live with a circadian rhythm. So first thing in the morning, you want to have bright light, and then in the evening, you want to do things that are nice and calming, get away from bright light so that you can actually get a good night's sleep. Okay, so those are all the basics that you can do. Hopefully some of them already help you. There's more. If you've tried these things already and they don't work, then you could go and do some more testing. That's where I come in, for example, with my clients. We do some lab testing. We look at blood work. If you go to the doctor and they say your thyroid is normal or your iron is normal, but actually you just don't feel right, then I will look at, okay, is this actually optimal? Is it in the normal range but just below optimal? And maybe we need to support it so that you can thrive and all the symptoms, your system can work well. So I do this with my patients one-on-one, but I'm also creating a platform, because not everyone can afford to see me one-on-one, where people can upload their test results, the normal test results they had from the doctor, their cholesterol, their iron levels, their B vitamins, and see whether it is optimal and what they can do about it from a functional medicine perspective. It's not ready, but there is a site to sign up to be notified when it launches, or you can email me so I can let you know when it's ready. Should be a few more months. And then obviously there's more in-depth checking. So if you've done all these things and you just feel like, actually I'm constantly bloated, or I just feel constantly wired, or I have endometriosis or bloating or PMS or all these things I mentioned, then there can be more in-depth testing. And I compare functional medicine often to a detective that looks at, okay, what's actually going on under the further deeper down. Once you've done all the basics, which often in a lot of people already do wonders, but if that's not quite enough, then you can go a little deeper, look at how is the body breaking down your hormones, how do you have food intolerances, do you have stress or hormone issues with your cortisol issues, do you have an overgrowth of certain types of bacteria or fungus, candida in the gut, or do you not have enough of them? So you can test all of that with specialty testing. Okay, so this is it for today. You can find a lot more free information on my channels. I try and upload regularly onto my social media and podcast on different topics, short ones, a little longer ones. I also have a free download. If you go to my website, there is a free download for a Muffin top ebook where I go into the factors that contribute to the apple shape and what you can do day to day, how to do core training and ice bath and those kinds of things. It's a little bit more depth. That's free. You can download that if you want. And if you want a little bit more information, I mentioned it before. Last year I ran a 4-week. A few times I ran a 4-week course with the Life Center Live. The 4-week Muffin top reset that was mostly focused on the apple shape, but also in a way it talks about how to eat, how to live, how to sleep to support all of it, metabolism, healthy aging, and that's recorded and you can access it on my website. Again, if you don't want to write it down now, you can just reach out to me via email. Obviously, you can work with me one-on-one. That's what I do most of the time, but those are the options if that's maybe not in your budget. Okay, so now I will be opening up to questions. Now, what do you think about programs like Zoe? That's a good question. And I'm actually doing another talk on, I will answer it in a nutshell in a moment, but I'm doing another talk like today in 2 weeks' time on all different types of home testing, all these different tools that are out there. Similar to today, I'll be going through Zoe, I'll be going through blood sugar monitors, I'll be going through all the monitorings on your watches and rings and all these kinds of things. But quickly now, the Zoe, I think it's a good starting point. It has some, okay, so Zoe gives you basically a blood sugar monitor, and it gives you a stool test. The stool test is sadly very basic. It's a good starting point, but it is actually very pricey for what it is. The blood sugar monitor you can buy it directly, the same one they use on Freestyle Libre. It's £50, and I think Zoe I can't remember now, but I think it's about £300, and then you have to have at least one first month subscription, which is another 100 or so roughly, and if you have to then remember to stop it. So it's fairly pricey. So if you're just interested in your blood sugar, you can get one of these monitors and do that yourself. And if you then want a more in-depth stool test, I then recommend going to a proper stool testing company, and I can help you with that if that's of interest, to actually get a proper one. So then in the end, you end up with the same amount of cost, but you have much more information. And in the end of the day, the Zoe program is actually not, the recommendations are they're not very specific. They're very generic. Obviously, they're all just kind of pulled together through data, and they're not there's no person that sits there and analyzes and creates your protocol. So I find it's maybe a good starting point, but it's quite costly for that. But yeah, like I said, I'll talk a lot more about that in 2 weeks time if you're interested. Okay, so there's another question. What would be the best first thing to implement that could make a difference? Okay, so for weight, if you had to pick one, oh God, this is so quick. Can I pick 3 things? Okay, what I see in my patients, number one, if it's from a dietary perspective, if you check your protein intake and make sure you hit your protein in 2 or 3 meals a day, and then fill up your plate with veggies and the rest, but you first make sure you get enough protein. I often find people already start to drop weight and get leaner, because by the fact that they're eating protein first and they're filling their body up, they don't have the hunger for any kind of processed foods, and their metabolism just gets this hit. Now, if there are some people that already eat a ton of protein and that doesn't work, but it's very rare. So mostly it's really protein. That is the biggest needle mover, and that's ideally as a real food, not as a protein shake, because shakes have a different effect on our gut microbiome, on the way they respond, our blood sugar response, the way our brain responds from a satiety, the way that if we're feeling satiated. And so I ideally would say go for protein first, and then all the rest kind of falls into place. Secondly, again, for diet, veggies, fiber. Unless you have a lot of digestive issues, bloating, then you might not benefit from that. But if you have more fiber and eat the rainbow, then you often also, as a second, protein first, then a lot of fiber, eating the rainbow. If you're getting that, you're feeding your gut microbiome, and you feel fuller, obviously, but you also have less inflammation, and you feed your whole body with all these wonderful nutrients. And then sleep. So stress is a difficult one to deal with, which is a huge one, but what sleep is in a way, that's something that I see often is missed. People think that they can get away with putting more in their day and more in their day, and then they wake up early to, like I said before, to do their exercise, and then they try and eat good all day, but then they just don't go to bed until midnight or 1 o'clock, and they're getting 5 or 6 hours of sleep. And everything you do the next day, your body is responding differently. You're slightly inflamed the next day. You're slightly insulin resistant the next day. So everything you do, and your gut microbiome is out of whack. So everything you do is actually not working that well. So that would be, I would say that's the third one. And stress is much harder to deal with. Sorry, there wasn't one, but there were 3.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. And I just wanted to ask, when you talk about carbs and maybe just having it twice a day, you're not including vegetables, right?
Good. Yeah, that's a good question. So, if you were to, again, I'll answer that in a moment. But if you were to do the 4-week course that I put up for fairly cheap, that I have like full PDFs where it's all specified how to calculate what are carbs. It's all very much more in detail. But for today, so yeah, any kind of vegetable that is not a really high sugar vegetable. There's only a few high sugar vegetables like beets and cooked carrots. I would say those are the ones that are basically carbs, but all the rest you can forget about the carb intake, because it's so little, and the fiber in it makes up for it, kind of actually gets rid of the sugar and negates the effect it has on your blood sugar level. So yeah, you can don't need to start calculating broccoli and tomatoes and all these different things. You just eat as much of those as your digestion can tolerate without bloating. Ideally, you email me and say, can I please have the protein sheet, calculation sheet, or a link to whatever else, and then I can send it to you. That would be the best. It was lovely meeting you guys. I hope you found this helpful, and I hope to see you at some point again soon.